Welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, your podcast for heads of school, Rosh Yeshivas, principals, and anyone else interested in improving the state of Jewish education. I am thrilled to have with me this morning Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Kobrin, an old friend, a mentor, a colleague, and someone from whom I believe we can all learn. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today.
It is an honor to be here, and longtime listener, first time participant, but this is a very exciting moment, and I'm happy to contribute whatever I can.
Wonderful. I can tell you, you are the first person on this podcast who's used that classic line of longtime listener, first time participant. So that's going to be our new thing. So for those who don't know, Jeff is the head of school of Rosh Yeshiva at North Shore Hebrew Academy, which ranges from preschool through 12th grade. Jeff, give us just a little bit of the demographics of your school, number, any trends in the last couple of years, and that'll give us the background for what we really want to get into today.
Okay. Well, we're a school of about 1,240 plus kids from 2-year-olds through high school seniors in Great Neck, which is in Long Island, New York. What I like to think is unique about our school is ethnically, culturally, we have kids who are Ashkenazic, we have kids who are Sephardic and Sephardic. Both of those buckets are very wide. The Sephardic bucket includes a lot of kids from Iranian descent. We have Bukharian kids, we have Moroccan kids, we have kids from all different streams of Sephardism. And then we have the Ashkenazi kids who are, I would say, relatively more landed in America. And that provides us with a lot of challenges, but a lot of tremendous opportunities as well.
Okay. So again, not a small school, right? We're at over 1,200. And I know in my work, I probably work with close to double digit at this point, schools who have a really significant mix of Jewish families from a variety of ethnic national backgrounds, as you said, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, across the spectrum, not to make either one of those focused on a specific, country per se. But tell us first about, some of the challenges. What happens when you bring people and families of vastly different backgrounds, probably different attitudes towards education, different attitudes towards family, child raising, like you name it. What were some of the key challenges, or what are some of the key challenges that you see? And what have you thought about in terms of addressing them?
I've been here in this school since 2008. And before I got to North Shore, I took a friend of mine out for lunch who was of Syrian background. And I said, you got to, give me the lay of the land. He said, well, hold on, sir. I'm Syrian and your people are Persian. And that was my first inkling that when I'm as Ashkenazi as gefilte fish, through and through. And my first inkling that, and I understand there's a difference between a Litvak and a Galician and all the things, all the nuances that we're used to in the Ashkenazi world. But I had again, this is 15 years ago, but I had no sense of, sub varieties within Sephardism, and it's been a tremendous education for me in terms of learning about the culture and what Jews are like all over the world. So that's been fascinating just at a personal Klal Yisrael level. Some of the challenges and some of the exciting things are. So how do you teach? I grew up, I went to Ramaz, I worked at Ramaz. We were very at the time, very Ashkenaz-centric, and there were 1 or 2 Sephardi kids in the school, I think, at the time. So Holocaust education, for example, was a no-brainer because everyone, if their family hadn't been part of that experience, their cousins had or their second cousins had. So that was just something that you talked about and was something that was clearly front and center to the 20th century Jewish experience.
Right.
What do you do with half the population of the school who skipped that part of Jewish history? I mean, it's very sad and very tragic, but it doesn't resonate for them at the personal level.
So I'm gonna push just a little bit more here, and I want to frame for our listeners that we are talking here about schools that might have Jewish families from different cultural backgrounds, but it applies to every particular school, just in slightly different ways, right? Really, the underlying topic here is how to deal with families that have each their own slight nuances of culture, value system, focus, and the conflicts that arise. As a school, you can't assume there is one right way, like you just said, right? we always educate about the Holocaust. That is, we do that, and we assume that most kids have a grandparent who's a survivor, or a great grandparent, or a neighbor. But now you're dealing with another population. Just to push you a little bit, can you give us an example of a conflict? Like, where do you come up with values of some families versus values of others culturally are actually, you can't meet both because they're contradictory?
In high school, what is your goal for your child in high school? Do you want them to graduate and then go into the business and probably get a college degree just because you need to have a college degree, but they're not really interested in the highfalutin fancy colleges that American kids could get into? That's one significant, percentage of the population. And then you have the others who are very Ivy League driven and excellence driven and rigor driven. And we don't care if our kids are happy. We want our kids to succeed. Whereas the first half are like, Rabbi, he should be happy. They should love learning. So those are values that can work together, but they can also, bang heads with each other. And that's a
Right.
challenge.
And as you're somewhat educated. I think if anyone's watching the video, they can probably see more books on Jeff's bookshelves behind him than most people have read in their
I read
lifetime.
some. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so you have that education, that Ivy League pedigree, that, growing up, and I grew up in a similar culture of, hey, what kind of doctor do you want to be? You can be any
Right.
kind of doctor that you want. And I, of course, disappointed my parents by being an educational doctor rather than a medical doctor. But at least I'm some kind of doctor. And if you can't make it in medicine, perhaps you can be some kind of lawyer. And so we take that as like, yeah, it's funny. We get to poke fun at ourselves, but also there's a subtext of that's what you do if you're successful. And there's sort of a value statement attached to that as well, which you're saying, okay, a good portion of your school population says, no, that's actually not a value. So how do you as the educator work with that group, which is saying something that, maybe growing up as a kid, you would have been like, well, that's just, lazy, or that's just not, it's not different. That's not a value, just being happy. What's the deal with that?
Before I get into how we address it, because you find ways to address it, but I think it would be easier if the whole school were like that. And I just have to adjust my own, snobby standards to where I thought the school was. And I realized that a lot of my snobby standards are just snobby and not actually accurate. For example, we had a student who was a senior, it was either last year or 2 years ago, who was super bright. And we had spoken to her about, you should think about medical school. And she said, I want to have a family. I'd rather
Mhm.
be a PA and have time. And that's a great Jewish core value, and which she got from her own family. We had another kid who had gotten into an Ivy League school and was deciding between between Queens College honors program and the University of wherever. Again, where I came when I was coming, what are you talking about? You're going to the Ivy Leagues, but the kid was saying it's a lot of money for my parents. I don't want to be that far from home. Maybe, and my mom's expecting a baby. Maybe I should just stay local. And that was a real, a real, he had to really think about that, which I found that again, that for me is just fascinating. So what we end up doing in terms of college guidance in the high school is we really have two different tracks. The kids who are, more tachlis oriented, who are going to business, for many of whom a dormitory situation is not something that their families will even consider, and they're going to stay local, and everyone's fine with that, and we help them with that. And the other Ivy League, bound, and we help those kids in a totally
Right.
different way. Where it gets interesting is spending the gap year in Israel, because
Okay.
again, I would say for many of the kids from Sephardi backgrounds, they would love to be able to do it, but again, culturally, especially for the girls as opposed to the boys, they're not sleeping out of their house until they're married. So, and I see that shifting actually post October 7th, that more kids are being allowed to go to Israel. It's more of an accepted reality, which I think is great. And that's trending upwards, certainly in our school, and I think in other schools as well. But that's a
Right.
challenge. Like the number of kids who want to go to
Right.
Israel as opposed to the number of kids who finally end up going is not the same.
Right. Right. And I love that you can create those two tracks in the college guidance. And when you're doing year in Israel guidance, you can also customize it for the individual kid. But what do you do in math class
Right.
in high school, right? Because you may have, or math, whatever class it is, how do you deal with it when they all have to be in the same room?
Correct. So it has a trickle down effect, right? College is the easy part, relatively. What do you do? What do you do in eighth grade? Does the kid have to take algebra, or is it okay that you just take pre-algebra? And again, it's because the family values and the tensions start long before the kids are juniors in high
Yeah.
school. They start when they're in second or third grade, or even before that. So when we can, and this is really much more, I think, in high school where there's just a deeper bench of faculty, we have multiple academic levels, both in Limudei Kodesh, both in Judaic studies, as well as in general studies. And often you will find kids who are, even if they're just going to go to a local community type college, they're interested in pushing themselves intellectually. What something that I think about a lot and is not unique to Ashkenazim or Sephardim or North Shore Hebrew Academy, I worry that the whole idea of intellectual curiosity and the humanities is not where it was when you and I were doing our, initial college studies, and that I think is a real. I mean, I know that that's a problem way beyond the Jewish community, but I worry about that because I think
Right.
for kids to
What's
really to be thoughtful human beings, you need to read. And I'm an English literature person. You need to read to know
So I
history.
am also an English literature person. I only did a BA. You have a slightly more advanced degree in English literature per se, but so you and I share what I would label a bias in that, right? Because what we're saying, the value of the humanities, I would write essays about that. But what do you say to the half or more of your school population who's like, humanities? That's really nice for you white European guys, but that's not our culture. That's not what we believe in. We don't think that this is helpful. We actually think it's harmful and we're not interested.
Well, two things. Number one, it goes beyond just the Sephardi. Like I said, this is if the number of English majors at Columbia College has dipped, that's not because there are fewer Ashkenazi kids going. That's just people are more interested in getting a
Right.
business degree or learning math or learning STEM and coding, even though AI is going to take care of that. So I think that's a societal challenge writ large. So what we say to them is, listen, open your mind to it. I mean, I had a parent who was very upset in our middle school. The kids were learning Greek myths because he said it was avodah zarah, it was idol worship, which I'd never heard that one before. And I said, listen, we believe in a certain degree of cultural literacy, and kids are going to be out there in the world. Even if they're in business, they're going to be dealing with all kinds of people, and they should know who Theseus was, or there's a certain amount of just general knowledge that's important to know. I'm not concerned that they're going to then start worshiping the sun as opposed to.
No, that's not our primary religious concern. So, okay, so that's a great example of what you, from your perspective, can do in enriching your constituents and community who are coming from a different cultural perspective. Can you give me an example of the reverse? What are some ways in which you see this mixing of Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews, and again, the range in both sides, the mixing of them as a corrective perhaps to some of the challenges inherent in Ashkenazi American Jewish culture?
There's a lot. There's a lot. Meaning, if I walk into a minyan or minyan, depending which it is, by and large, the Sephardi minyan has many, many more engaged students, just in terms of their reading of the tefillot, what their internal soul connection to God is. Only God knows that. But their reading of the tefillot, their answering of the amen to the kaddish and things like that, they're far more engaged, brushstrokely than the Ashkenazi kids. And how can we get that excitement about tefillah and cross-pollinate it and bring it over to the Ashkenazi side? So when we have a Shabbaton, we will split the tefillot. We'll alternate. And so at least the Ashkenazi kids are exposed to this level of engagement. Whereas when they daven in their Ashkenaz minyan, they don't see it on a daily basis. I find by and large the Sephardi kids are much more comfortable navigating an Ashkenazi minyan than the opposite. And I would love it to get to the point where they're equally comfortable in both. When I was in yeshiva in Israel, I believe, I might be retro writing it, but I believe whoever got up to lead the tefillot, whoever got up to lead the prayers, That was the way they did it. Was Ashkenazi was Ashkenaz, it was Sephardi, and everyone just went with
Yeah.
it. Our kids are not at that level of literacy, but I'd love to get them there because there's so much they can learn. That's just one example.
Right. So just to expand this, and we just have a few more minutes, but to expand this, what will you take from here that could apply to any head of school who is dealing with a culture, maybe it's fully Ashkenazi, maybe it's fully Sephardi, whatever mix you are, you still have a range of families, right? And each family comes with their own personal culture, their own personal family background and values, which are often different than yours as a head and often different than the other families in the room. So, what advice would you extract from this that any head could use when dealing with their parent and student community?
Anyone, I mean, there are a reason that movie tropes have different cliques in the schools. It's the jocks and the nerds and the cheerleaders and the whatever. Like any school has different social strata and different social groups. What is a newer phenomenon, I would say, in American schools is you have different political groups. It used to be that, everyone just, okay, I'm Democratic, you're Republican, whatever. Now it's much more divisive and much more, belligerent, and it's okay. We can learn from the other guy. They have something to say. I have something to say. We have to listen to each other. So that, I think, that's major. That's major. That has nothing to do with Sephardi and Ashkenazi is just a lot that I've been given, but it could. There's
Mhm.
always different groups and different tensions and different things like that. It could be some are more financially well off and some are not, or some are from this geographic region and some are from that one, and each one comes with all their own mores and values and things like that.
Right. And if I can go back to what you were saying before, you essentially share two sort of models, right? Your college guidance model, which is look, as a school, we have to serve every family. And so when we can give each family what they individually need, like in college guidance, right? We're only helping your kid go where is best for them and best within your whole family structure.
Yep.
Then we can do that. We can do the sort of, giving everybody their particular flavor. Then there's the other side of it, which I think is actually but definitely the more challenging and also the more promising, which is what you were saying about minyan/minyan, right? Taking your prayer services and saying, we could simply do separate prayer services based on culture and tradition, right? Everybody's got their own. You've got 1,200 kids. You certainly have enough to break them up into however many groups you want. And you're saying, no, 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 we're actually going to cross pollinate purposefully. And we're
Yep.
going to try and do that in a way that enables you to learn from the other, benefit from the other. And I would imagine that on some level, the kids who went through your school are much more comfortable, broadly speaking, than kids who went through a, more monolithic sort of environment.
This goes again. This is core beliefs, and this is ideals. But there are not so many Jews in the world, and we have so much to learn from each other. And we've seen time and time again that it's so easy for us to fight with each other and just break it down to the stupidest, smallest, different details that are going to be the breaking point. If we can be a microcosm of real openness and listening and learning from the other at our school, imagine how far that could go. I know that we're successful to a degree because every year or so, I would say there's one or two weddings between, a Schwartz family and a Hakimian family, and the in-laws have no idea what to do with each other. But these two kids grew up together and fell in love in school, and they're making a family of a totally culturally mixed background, and that makes me so happy to see that.
Right. And that's, I mean, I see it in Israel happening everywhere, right? It's a totally different sort of situation. But in America, it's been much more divided over the years. And like you said, that falling in love and being able, hopefully that's high school, not your preschool, but that falling in love and ending up, building a family together only works if you've had some of that positive exposure. And that again goes down to the very core, which I think is relevant in all schools of how you enable kids to see the value in others and in other cultures that are not their own, right? Because if I'm a Ivy League culture, it's really easy for me to look down at a culture who has a very different perspective on higher education and vice versa. And so again, if you give me what I need on the one hand, but also push me on the other to have more of that exposure, then hopefully you can begin that kind of remixing process that is beneficial for everyone.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you for your time, Rabbi Dr. Kobrin. This has been really thought-provoking. I've enjoyed it. Everyone listening, I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. If you have questions for Rabbi Kobrin, you can find his information on the North Shore Hebrew Academy website, or you can get it through me. Think about how this might apply to your school and let me know what you think. Try it out and let us know. You can reach us, as always, on LinkedIn, Barry Kislowitz, Substack, Leadership Lenses, or on our website, www.kislowitzconsulting.com. Have a great day and happy leading.